Any add-ons from the panelists, just in terms of what your peers were saying, or?
Dragos here, the technical person. So I saw here some comments about the complexity of the framework and the possible implementation. Strictly from technical point of view, so Tom did a brilliant presentation. Yes, it is quite complex, and we know that it is complex. That's why we arrived in this point with the whole industry, and that's why there are not a lot of alternatives right now, because it's quite a complex problem. The good news is that we do have a solution that works. It means if you want to test it, to implement it for your company and to get advantage of this methodology, it's possible. It's not a deal breaker. So just to make the difference between what is the theory behind, which is complex, and what is possible from technology point of view, which is at hand. That's my opinion on it. Thank you.
If I could just add that, I mean, there's no danger of trying to boil oceans here with a proof of concept. We can take a product and just look at a product in isolation. We've got technology which we use offline. We even have an Excel spreadsheet version of it if we want to go really basic. But it's all, I mean, what Dragos demonstrated is ready to be applied. And as Dragos said, it can be customized for any organization, any products, any business components, et cetera, And for us, what is critical is when we put the results in front of them, do we get the wow effect? I'm obviously biased, but we have had a lot of experience, or I've had a lot of experience of applying this methodology in a big financial institution. So I had a monstrous sandbox that I could play around in. And I'm going to say I got the wow effect. That, I mean, in JP Morgan Chase, we had operations managers that managed huge departments and operations. And they always looked at risk and control self-assessment as something that, you know, okay, if you want us to do it, we'll do it. And operations managers are masters at obfuscation, and they know how to tweak things like risk and control self-assessments just to keep because you've got to remember, in a bank, an ops manager has got compliance people coming at him, auditors coming at him, external auditors coming at him while they're, you know, still trying to do their day jobs. So they become masters of obfuscation. Risk accounting, you can't obfuscate because it is, first of all, it is auditable, because if you look at the questionnaires as they've been constructed, they are industry consensus best practices. So either you're doing it or you're not doing it. So it's a yes or no. It's not, it's red, it's amber, it's green, it's on a scale of 1 to 10, it's high, medium, low. It is, do you do it or don't you do it? Or we give them a drop-down box with benchmarks. Where is your operation positioned on these benchmarks? And that could be subsequently audited. I mean, one of the processes that we anticipate is that it starts with self-assessment. I mean, people who know the credit process, lending officers do self-assessments. And then once in a while, a credit analyst will come along and do an independent assessment. And then that credit will be upgraded or downgraded, depending on the outcome of the independent assessment and what managers then agree is the right rating for that particular borrower. Through risk accounting, you can have exactly the same thing in operational risk, because if the self-assessment says the risk mitigation index is 80, and an auditor comes along and looks at it and says, well, actually, we think the risk mitigation index is 64. So you've got an audit adjustment on the table, which then has to be discussed and analysed and agreed upon. But you create that mechanism, which I think, well, I've seen it in practice, has a massive impact on the way people look at operational risk, non-financial risk, operational resilience, and so forth. businesses function on numbers, not colors. And why we've allowed this situation to go for 20 years or more of managing operational risk on colors, I don't know, but here we are.
I know we have 15 now. I'll add some bits if no one else wants to. Steve, do you want to talk about the RUs? I was just going to talk at some point just about the evolving 3 lines as well, and how we see from members, as all the business models and transformations, everything's changing so fast, just how risk, the organizational structure of risk, we talked about this yesterday, is changing so fast. And in our CROs meeting yesterday, they talked about how CROs need to be across all 3 lines when it comes to cyber, how they work more closely with the chief security officer, the CFOs. We're as Tom said, this is really urgent, and given these intangibles and non-financial risks and the accumulation of them. So I really hope we can get some more people, some more members, Premier and ACCA members, to get involved with this, with trialing it themselves. And yeah, it's exciting that today's presentations kind of took it to a new level, I think. What do you think, Steve?
I mean, stop me if I say too much and get carried away, but 3 lines of defense, you don't have 3 lines of defense in finance. You don't have 3 lines of defense in treasury. You don't have 3 lines of defense in credit. You only have it in risk, risk management. And to me, I mean, I've got a chapter on it in my book where I ask the question, is this a valid risk management process or management process, or is it a management fig leaf that's there to create the impression that something is effectively managed that in fact isn't being effectively managed, because you can't manage with colors. I mean, I keep coming back to that point. But I think the 3 lines of defense, if we had, and coming, talking to everything Tom said as well, if you had a viable, effective method, and we saw the ontologies that Tom mapped out in a very, very effective way. I mean, for me, it just absolutely hit the mark. If you had that kind of structure, the 3 lines of defense would just disappear. It would be irrelevant, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think, not to be nitpicky, the 3 lines, which it was changed, the IA changed in July of 2020, was to try, I mean, we saw how the pandemic proved all your points that you've just made. And I think, they were trying to achieve more assurance across those by renaming it that, and it was about collaborating more across. And we are seeing, I've seen some members who are the CROs, but are head of internal audit, and their titles have changed to internal audit and risk management, and they do have a dotted line now to the risk committee. So there are a lot of things changing, but I agree with everything but you said. I think change is hard for people to to deal with when they're used to these, and particularly like the comment, I think it was Kelly, he said in the comment, there's still going to be kind of territorial grounds, I think. And
yes, I think somebody said it yesterday, and how true it is that any change, particularly in large corporations, creates winners and losers. It's inevitable. Absolutely. And I mean, in my role in JP Morgan Chase, I've been through seen massive change, and I've seen massive losers and massive winners. But you've got to approach these things with the right framework, that even when people are disadvantaged, they're still treated properly and treated well, because that's going to be one of the outcomes. But that's the cost of progress.
Yep, and it's like you said yesterday too, and Steve, the whole panel yesterday, just about both professions needing to be more forward-looking. Internal audit used to be about root causes, and now we see teams of internal audit across different industries being much more forensic, if you like, to be able to provide that foresight the decision makers and the boards have changed. The boards, have had a wake-up call, and they're asking for stuff that that internal audit weren't able to give them before. And so accountancy professionals need to become much more multidisciplinary in that respect. They need to ask questions. They need to be more kind of like sleuths and, CIA agents in some ways, given the risks the organizations are dealing with.
And if you have the fundamental ontologies and quantification and aggregation methodologies to support organizations like auditors, you remove a lot of the fear element. I mean, I was ahead of my first job in Chase Manhattan in the legacy Chase Manhattan days, was a head of audit. And, you had, I have to say that I had real clout in those days because you had the absolute fallback. I mean, theoretically, I had a line through to Rockefeller. And if a major issue was identified, that's the kind of level it got escalated to. But as you just point out, the audit has become more and more forensic. That perhaps we're just not seeing the big pictures on issues. Since leaving JP Morgan Chase, I've done an amount of consulting, and I can relate so well to the kind of thing Tom has been talking about. Horror stories. Looking at situations where I thought, well, how have the internal auditors, I mean, why haven't they seen this and done something about it? But I feel like I'm...
Well, before I pass the mic to Steve, and also we need to do some more polling questions before time's up. But, ultimately, I mean, we could talk all day, but ultimately, this is the board's job to be able to, the audit committee is responsible for ensuring all of those governance and controls, aren't they? And this is another, topic in terms of getting change happening and getting things done. That's another fast evolving area. I mean, how the composition of audit committees are changing, the succession planning, the assessments and of effectiveness of boards and boards committees. That's a major big topic as well for this, I think. So we do have some polling questions that we need to do. So if any of the panelists, if you want to speak up now before we get to those, go ahead and
just briefly, if I may, we're talking about change and the resistance that it generates. Basically, we are witnessing painful change due to the way things are being done currently. So if there is a better way, and we can test it and we can see if it works or not, why not take it? Because for now, it's like we've been through the financial crisis, which was due to a lot of practices that were just being allowed in the market, and now we had the rest of the last 3 years of craze, which definitely adds to it, and we are still trying the old ways and try to make them work, although they've proven not to. Thanks.
Yeah, I think the curveball that 2022 has thrown us to, the change is only going to be accelerated, and there will be winners and losers. Okay. If you're not going to...
no, I'm more than happy.
Then we do the polling questions.
Yeah, talking of curveballs, really. I think I'd like to pose a different sort of dimension to what I've heard for the last couple of days. I mean, I'm so impressed that we can now really sort of feel, touch risk units. That's great. And we've got an object-centric, object-oriented risk box, which is also very good, because these things actually start to enable these things to go into the marketplace. I'm going to ask the next question. What next question? Okay. And some of this is I'm almost reliving a life several times over. So 20 years ago, I was involved in the early days of carbon. We set up a carbon trust, carbon disclosure projects. It was all about identifying carbon units, and then carbon units became, if you like, a currency. You can trade them, you can credit them. I kind of question with risk units, could you do something similar? Because monetization is going to be really important here. We can theorize to death, but unless the market sees an opportunity and grabs it, it'll be theory. So I can see an opportunity for monetization in, don't ask me details, of how you monetize risk units. I think that's very possible. And I think back again to probably 40 years now to the old IBM mainframe days when nobody knew how good their mainframe was performing. And everybody had to throw information in on 60 different characteristics to see where they were. And that meant they could either spend more money or less money on that particular element of the mainframe, or in this case, risk. And that became a very successful business because the companies that own mainframes had to pay to put their information in, but what they got back in return was anonymized positioning of where they were on various different points, different characteristics of their mainframes. Now, I can just see that the next stage after this has to be that go-to-market monetization, because that will bring it to market quicker and actually make it tangible.
Well, you're drawing me into something we had no intention of raising in this forum, but yes, we have had some deep thought on monetization because for all the reasons you've just outlined. I'm going to toss that one to my colleagues because they're closer to markets and monetization than I am. So, Paul or Dragos, do you want to pick up on that? And
yeah, I can pick it up. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because yes, this was an idea that we've been discussing for quite a while, and we think we see some solutions to that. Basically, as long as you standardize the unit of quantification for risk, and you basically isolate risk itself in the company's portfolio, ultimately, you may as well be able to trade it. And there are ways that risk may be tradable, and why we feel that it's very beneficial to the market is because you are actually isolated from the products. Because the way organizations are trying to ditch risk right now is by selling it together with the products that generated it. So, and not only that, but looking at the way derivatives evolved, is like they would be motivated to generate more, to sell more risky products in order to generate something that they can turn into something monetizable and get rid of it. And then, that would end up with somebody that would have to just accept the loss, and that's it. So from our perspective, it's like let's say splitting the risk from something that can be called garbage and just trade the risk itself, not together with the garbage, and not motivating the people trading it to generate more garbage, because ultimately the volume of risk in a market may as well be limited. It may as well be just floating around among operators, and people may take more risk or less risk depending on their strategies and their risk appetite and their risk capacity, or what the name of that was, and they can just trade, in a limited amount of risk, which they would not be motivated to increase, just because that would decrease the price of a risk unit on the market.
And that's got to be hugely interesting for regulators, because at the moment we've got the ultimate blunt instrument that regulators mandate how much capital a bank has to hold. And then the only exercise you've got to do is to say, well, is my book capital greater than the regulatory capital? And we all know the horrendous complexity. Well, you've got a kind of nonsense situation where the operational risk capital calculation is ridiculously simple, as opposed to other like the market capital regulations that have just come out, that you've got to be a PhD mathematician. They'd be right in Felix's sweet spot. But the majority of bankers, have no clue how these capital calculations come together. So if you could monetize risk in the form that Steve suggested and Paul commented on, then, like I say, that's got to be it's got to be of huge interest to banks and to regulators to start to unpick this horrendous capital imposition that organizations have.
Well, the reality, Peter, is that different organizations are all be going at different speeds. And as long as they're ending at the same end point, they're going to get there in different times and different ways. And that's where the introduction of a trading system for risk units could really bind it together.
And I mean, that's a highly critical element for academia. Felix, I don't know if Julian is still with us, but I mean, one of the big questions is, can we generally talk about the RU as a standardized unit of measurement applicable to all industries? Is that feasible, achievable? We have a framework where I would say with reasonable confidence, the RU in the banking sector is replicable across all banks in that sector, with the proviso, as Paul said, that you have standardized tables and templates to do those calculations. Is that then transportable to other industries? And we believe it is. Then there are big question marks. Well, if you transport it to another industry, is that RU the same? So these are kind of academic questions that we really need to start digging into.
If I understood the architecture of the risk box, which looked object orientated to me, that would be a relatively standard way of doing of putting different objects for different sectors, different markets.
Yeah, precisely. And then going back to what you said before about chartered risk specialists, whatever we call them, their skill would be to audit the application of that and ensure that what is being produced by it is comparable, company to company, sector to sector, department to department.
Yeah, thank you.
There was one up here about the questionnaire template, and there was one from Shane. Let's see.
I saw one, if I may, which sounded interesting to me, coming from Shane Lee. Clarify the distinction between RMI and the return component of a risk and return decisions.
Yeah, can you?
Yeah, shall I repeat it?
Yep.
Yeah. Clarify the decision. Sorry.
Yeah, does anyone want to address that for him? Peter, what do you think?
Or is that how do we account for the return offset to RMI non-financial losses?
That I think was a second question coming also from Shane Lee.
Is Shane happy to explain precisely? I'm not sure I understand what the return offset to RMI means.
Anyway, the first question he asked was clarify the distinction between RMI and the return component of risk and return decisions. I thought that was a bit clearer myself. The second one indeed is need a bit more.
Well, I think the clarify the distinction between RMI and the return component, risk and return.
If you want, I can clarify.
Yeah, please, if you
Yeah, I probably muddied it up there a bit. It seemed like the focus here for 2 days is on the loss side of the equation of risk and return decisions, and it's not accounting for the positive return part of the equation. So in other words, are we willing to, quite often we are willing to assume the risk because the return outweighs the risk. How does that factor into from an accounting perspective, how does that factor?
Well, if I may not address the issue you're raising directly, if not, steer me, but just as an aside, in all the documents that we've produced, for example, we talk about ESG attributes, not ESG risks, because if you proactively manage risk, you improve your risk mitigation index. which is then an offset to your inherent risk. So there's a kind of return on that. And if you start taking the portfolio view, then you should be able to do those return on investment calculations that are typical of a typical portfolio management technique. So I think that's that's why I envisage ESG and sustainability being integrated into accounting within the financial statements, because if you have high intellectual capital, that means you've got a very high RMI in things like execution, control, those things. If you have a high human capital, you have a high RMI in which reduces then your residual risk. So to a certain degree, we've integrated ESG and sustainability into the risk accounting method. Now, I don't know if that answers your questions, but things like return on risk investment, which Paul alluded to, is calculable because you've monetized the whole reporting function. So in as much as you have a return on investment, which is easily understood in financial risk, if we get to where we want to get to, you'd have exactly the same comparative application of things like return on investment for non-financial risk. Does that?
I may add, I'm not sure, maybe I'm simplifying things a bit. As far as I can understand, Shane mentions that we are looking more on the loss side than on the return side of this kind of risk and return decision. When it comes to loss, basically from what we've learned in all our experience with risk accounting, is that the issue here is that nobody knows exactly how much losses the business done until a certain point can bring. So indeed, the vision of a reward or of a return can be very appealing, but the problem is that in a lot of situations, there is a huge loss that may come at the end. To me, there is an example, there is the Deutsche Bank example that I think in the report for 2018, they finally published something like 400 million euros in profit after 4 years of cost cutting, which must have been painful. And if that was published in January 2019, then in February 2019, there was a report about the $1.6 billion loss. So, it's like losses became, or profits became a hole in the losses, if that can be described like that. Yeah. So from our perspective, knowing the size of the probable loss is quite valuable, because that saves your profits ultimately. And this is what is not visible today to the businesses. Basically, this also leads into a fairly reckless risk culture, because as long as you sell a product, it doesn't seem to matter how risky it is, as long as it seems to be making a profit. And this is what seems to have been the situation in the financial crisis, when they started going into subprime markets so that they can generate the loans that they would then turn into derivatives. So as long as you know your exposure and you know how much of the amount of risk, the amount of how you get to know the size of the probable loss, you'd get your whole behavior may as well change in terms of risk, because ultimately it's not the probability of loss that hits you, is the size of the loss. This is why we believe the risk accounting method definitely must be.
If I could just add to that and say, in accounting speak, if an organization accepts a risk, it also accepts a probability of loss. And no organization on this planet can afford a group risk mitigation index of 100. So it doesn't matter how good your organization is, you are exposed to the probability of loss because you've accepted risk. The difference here is because we don't quantify that probability, no organization on this planet has the ability to quantify that probability of loss I'm talking in non-financial risk terms. And because of that, you don't have a fix on what your expected losses are. And because you don't have that fix on expected losses, you're also exposed to unexpected losses. So where we want to get to is to have expected losses within a framework like we have in finance. You know, we have people who have who are authorized to approve risk limits, and we have limits for particular business components, for example, and targets for business components, and this all falls within the RU context and the RMI context. And if we get that functioning really well, we will still have expected losses, but we should eliminate unexpected losses. I mean, I think that's where we're heading towards. And there can't be anything worse for a board, a CEO, a CFO to wake up one morning and find from the media that they've just suffered, as in the case of JP Morgan Chase and the London Whale, when when the risk experts all around you have said there is no exposure here, and all of a sudden you're sitting in front of a Senate Banking Committee hearing trying to explain a $6 billion trading loss.
Well, also the regulators, I mean, you know, after this, like Paul said, the CDOs and the financial crisis, and
Yes.
and just, you know, we're talking basic interest rate swaps over here with the pension funds. It's sort of the same old story.
Yeah, well, if you look at the London Whale, you had hugely complex trading instruments created that were hedged by hugely complex trading instruments. So if somebody runs a model on a spreadsheet and says, okay, the position is square, the fact of the matter is that square position is the result of using horrendously complex trading instruments and hedging instruments. Mm-hmm. So if your point of departure is the inherent risk in those instruments, then you've got a massive exposure and massive operational risk exposure. So the modelers may be saying the position is square, but risk accounting is saying you've got a massive inherent risk. How good is your risk mitigation index? Mm-hmm. And then we find that the traders were managing the models, so they get a 0 on model, they get a 0 RMI on model risk management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if somebody had gone to Jamie Dimon and said, well, the modelers are saying the position is square, but we have a 40% RMI, and based on these volumes of trades that we're doing means we have a residual RU of I don't know how many billions, then that has to get a reaction. But as we saw, Jamie Dimon, who went public and said this is all a tempest in the teapot based on what his modelers had told him and his risk experts had told him, really made himself look a bit of a fool, which I'm sure Jamie Dimon doesn't take too kindly to.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know you all, including Tom too, in Ireland, you've worked with regulators at some point. I mean, the project that you worked on, that Durham worked on with since we have US and Canadian audience, with was it the Chicago Fed or New York Fed, or was it all the board, the whole Federal Reserve Board? I mean, what was your kind of take on their views of this? I mean, we're seeing more regulators and quasi-regulators come to us for, like, we've always been asked for comments, for consultations, for proposals, but we have a whole public sector division now working with them about accounting. And I guess, Peter, that's another thing for us to talk about is, you know, for policymakers, given trying times.
Well, I know this is an area Tom lives and breathes, because I know he does a lot of work with regulators. Let me just say that you know, I've also spent in my career spent a lot of time working with / dealing with the Fed, they are not going to express an opinion ever on a risk management technique, which is why, I mean, they will respond to a bank that approaches them and basically says, we have a better way of managing risk and quantifying risk capital. Then I think they'd have to have a look, which is why we desperately need financial institutions that are prepared to allow us to go under their bonnet if you're in the UK, hood if you're in the USA, to start working with them so that you can start building a case. The work we did with the Washington Fed, and I'm sure Paul and Dragos will agree with us, was totally supportive. I mean, when we said I mean, these data sets that we were working with were so huge, so monstrously huge, that we needed help. We couldn't do it on our own. I mean, I know Dragos spent many nights and weekends trying to figure out how to you know, prepare the data so that we could do the analysis we wanted to do. And I'm sure Felix has had a lot of experience with that kind of stuff as well. But we never got from the Fed, this output is absolutely fantastic. And they're never going to do that. I mean, you saw we showed you a chart. Well, I showed you a chart yesterday of the output that we generated, which tells a story. But like I say, the Fed are never going to express an opinion on it or have or engage in a policy discussion unless a bank goes to them and says, we want to do this. Tom, do you have anything to?
Yeah, I agree with you. What I was thinking earlier was that there is a knowledge asymmetry between regulators and financial institutions, and it's not just in the quantitative modeling side of things. I think it pervades all those places. And looking certainly at the Bank of England and the FCA, what I noticed in my time interacting with them over the last number of years is the churn in staff as well. You know, very, very bright people who wanted to advance particular new ways of operation soon left, and there was a vacuum, and the people who were replacing them weren't quite up to speed, particularly in areas like AI and stuff like that. And I think that's true too in Europe. The MiFID II, I think there is a story, right? And there were some Irish regulators involved as well, that they were effectively regulating in the dark. They didn't understand the whole derivative space. And so the regulation that came out, you know, was pretty much like a shotgun approach at regulation. So I think there's that issue. I think that could be a big issue. And I remember having a conversation famously with folks from the Office of Financial Research in the States, and we were talking about the introduction of standards for financial reporting and one particular initiative, and they were of the opinion that'll never happen. You know, nobody's interested in adopting it. But I think like Peter outlined, the larger players, if they come in with a suggestion like that, they will be listened to. And you know, the Basel Committee's principles in operational risk and resilience, you'll find a lot of industry input there as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, we know the FCA and we know the New York Fed too is looking at its risk culture, conduct. FCA is also looking at, I think it was Tommy just walked off, but I had to go away, but about consumer protection as well, like with fintechs and everything. That's something that FCA, and But my point is, if you take a step back and look at how you account for the risks, that's kind of the point of those initiatives and those focuses, really, combating fraud and protecting customers for making bad decisions and not understanding their bigger picture, their unexpected losses. More of Peter's fun polling questions. And I want to know what he thinks of the results as they come up. Also, thank you to everyone who has reached out. Few of you, we really appreciate it. And please don't be shy if you'd like to learn more from Peter about the initiative and what RASB, Durham, anything ACCA related as well, contact Steve and I. Please do reach out and keep the dialogue going. And we'll definitely look forward to hopefully coming back with some progress with you maybe in the new year.
Just as an aside, I think in 1988, I think a huge mistake was made that we're still paying for, and that's when the first capital accord appeared from the Basel Committee, and they introduced their own risk metric, which was the RWA, which kind of took accountants out of the equation, because the regulators decided to go it alone, taking balance sheets and basically having banks computing their own risk-weighted assets. So in other words, there was no requirement for accounting for risk. So I think that's where the divergence occurred between risk and accounting, and over the decades that have passed between the first capital accord and Basel III and Basel IV now, we've operated with planet accounting and planet risk with not a huge amount of interaction between the two. So we're kind of hoping that risk accounting will be a bridge so that there's a common framework that risk professionals and accounting professionals can interact. Rate the likely degree of interest your organization will have in participating in proofs of concept. Again, I think this is a pleasing one. I'm going to make an appeal here. We can't progress with the research unless we have this kind of engagement from the industry. So if you are of a mind to work with us, then we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I hope if everyone, what they take away and they want to digest a bit, please get in touch anytime to work with us on this. And all of us would be happy to answer any questions. Feel free to reach out. If you have more logistic questions, please contact my colleagues at the North America at ACCA email address. Also, if you are looking for any more kind of related content, contact me. I put my email address in there based on our forums and research. Can we access the recording? I believe so. Isn't that right? Yes, it's on demand, and I believe we can send you the recording too. So I really appreciate everyone attending, and I can't thank the panelists enough. I think it's been a really rich discussion, and I hope that we have more members come on board from North America. So have a great afternoon, all of you on the other side of the pond, and all of my fellow panelists on this side. Have a great evening.
On behalf
of
RASB, can I thank ACCA for hosting and organizing the event. I think it's all worked extremely well. So thank you very much for that. Okay.
Thank you. All the
Thank
best.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest
Thank
of your
you, everyone.
days. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.